Hello and welcome to Physiology of Endurance Performance. I'm Dr. John Mercer, and this is an upper division class, KIN 457, or for graduate students, it's 657. Over the semester, we're going to talk about the physiology of doing endurance events. And this will be a fun class. It's very applied. And in this presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit of a sense of the structure for the class or the way that we're going to approach this semester. So endurance performance is really going to be focused on iron distance events or endurance events in general, like a marathon or half marathon or maybe even a 10K or 5K. But we'll talk a lot about iron distance events. Now, the general way that we talk about iron distance events is we use the phrase Ironman. Ironman is a brand, and there are other iron distance brands as well. Challenge, Outlaw, Silverman was once a non-Ironman iron distance event. An iron distance event is a general way to describe any event that includes a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike, and a 26.2-mile run, all on the same day. And I'll give you some details on this iron distance event, how long it typically takes someone, from pros to mere mortals. We will also be talking about marathons, and the textbook that you'll be using talks a lot about marathons as well as ultra marathons. An ultra marathon is any distance beyond 26.2 miles. And we'll talk about a wide variety of distances, because really a 5K run or a 10K run, those also classify as endurance events. Now, one way to get to know iron distance events or Ironman events is to go to YouTube. And I'll just show you a brief video of YouTube of an iron distance event. I don't have any connection with Ironman. Well, actually I do. I do a lot of their events. I help volunteer for events when I'm not racing. My wife helps organize volunteers for rock and roll marathons, which is also owned by Ironman. But an Ironman, they're all over the world. It starts with a 2.4-mile swim. And later in the semester, we will actually talk about different ways to start the swim so it's safe. After you get out of the swim, you jump on your bike and you bike 112 miles. This race is Kona. I'll show some other races later on, like Norseman, that are done in the cold weather. It's an individual race, so you can't draft off each other. And once you do a 112-mile bike ride, you exchange your bike shoes for running shoes. And you run 26.2 miles. I'll talk in more detail about this later on, but the pros will do this in about 8 hours. Sub 8 hours is really quite amazing in the men's division. In the women's division, 8.5 hours is fantastic, and that's what the pros will typically do, maybe 8:15. For mere mortals, you have up until 17 hours to complete this event. And at 17 hours, they actually close the course, and you're not allowed to finish. Well, actually, you can finish, but you just don't get a finisher medal, nor do you show up in the results. Now, this video highlighted some pros, but there are all different types of people that do these types of events. Pro athletes, amateur athletes, age group athletes, all different kinds, all different shapes of athletes, all different ages of athletes. And we're going to talk about that. And in fact, what I hope is to really talk about the information this semester with you in mind, or other people in our community who are training for these events and trying to complete them, as well as those who are trying to compete in them and trying to win a podium, either overall or age group. So go ahead and watch some different YouTube videos or your favorite video browser for Iron Distance event. Put in triathlon, Ironman, try Norseman. It's pretty fun. All right, so why do people do these events? Like I said, some people will take 17 hours to do this event. A good time is to do an Ironman in about 12 hours. 10 hours is fantastic. But why do they do them? How should they prepare to be successful? What type of training do they need to do? What type of nutrition? How do they prevent injuries? Or if they have an injury, how do they rehab them? We'll talk about these types of things. And in general, an athlete will train anywhere from 10 hours a week to as much as 30 hours per week in preparation for this type of event. What kind of equipment is needed? Do you need one of these super bikes that we actually saw in the video? Uh, Probably not, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about wearable technology. We'll talk about ways to track your fitness using different software packages like Strava or Garmin Connect or Training Peaks. And there's a lot of neat wearable technology that you can use during training as well as during an event to get different types of metrics that you can look at to evaluate your fitness. You know, heart rate is an obvious one, but we'll look at some other metrics throughout the semester and other software packages that people are using to be able to track their fitness. Common questions that we get out in the field when we're talking with endurance athletes are things like, how do I measure heart rate? Why do I measure heart rate during exercise? How do I measure heart rate? Do I use a wrist-based monitor? Do I use a chest strap? Do I use an earbud that has a heart rate monitor built into it? How much should I drink during exercise? Clearly, exercising here in Vegas is quite different than if we're doing an Ironman in Norway. What should I eat and how much should I eat during an endurance event? What type of food should I eat? Should I be eating carbohydrates, fats, proteins, what have you? What shoes should I buy? And what intensity should I train at? These are very common questions that we get when talking with endurance athletes. How do you answer these questions? Well, your job as a student of kinesiology is to use all the classes that you've taken, all the information that you've covered in different classes to provide information to these people, these athletes. And in this class, we're really going to talk and focus on the physiology aspects of kinesiology and apply physiological concepts to understanding endurance performance. So we'll go through the questions like this, and we should be able to answer these types of questions by the end of the semester. Some of them you can probably already answer, and we need to take that knowledge that you have already and apply it to endurance performance. So what's the relationship between heart rate and VO2? What is lactate threshold, ABLA, lactate turn point, anaerobic threshold, ventilatory threshold? What do all those mean? What causes fatigue? What is fatigue? How do I prevent fatigue? What is the typical sweat rate during exercise? How much fluid do I lose during exercise? Do I need to take sodium during exercise? How much should someone drink during an endurance event? Should I have 1 bottle, 2 bottles per hour? How many calories per hour should an athlete take in during an endurance event? Should those calories be carbohydrates? How much carbohydrate per hour? How about fat? Should we actually be eating fat during endurance events, or should we be taking in any protein? And what happens during core temperature during exercise? Clearly we get warm. How warm do we get? How does skin temperature vary? How does core temperature vary? Why is that information helpful to an athlete? So these are questions that we in kinesiology need to be able to answer and understand the science behind in order to provide information back to an athlete. How do we do this and what are we going to do this semester? Well, I like to think of it as an immersive learning experience. So I really need you to stay connected with the class, stay connected with the endurance community. You can follow Las Vegas Triathlon Club Facebook page. You can follow UNLV Biomechanics Facebook page. Stay in contact with Web Canvas campus via Canvas. And there's different web pages, like a web page I have for information on this class, as well as other classes as well. Immerse yourself in the topic And you'll find that you'll be able to apply the concepts and terms quite well if you do so. A model that we're going to talk quite a bit about this semester is this right here. And what this model represents is kinesiology in general. So in this model, what I have up here at the top is our body has a lot of chemical energy. We'll go through energy later on, but energy is just the capacity to do work. We have electrical energy, mechanical energy, chemical energy. We have nuclear energy, solar energy, energy from water, what have you. Uh, that's all the capacity to do something, to move something, to create a force and apply it over some distance. In our body, we have chemical energy in the form of fats, carbohydrates, and even proteins, but fats and carbohydrates primarily. And this column here represents some of the important issues that we need to understand in this class regarding chemical energy. We need to know the fuel sources. Like I said, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. We need to know how those fuel sources are stored. Well, we have fat in the adipose tissue, we have free fatty acids, we have triglycerides, and you need to understand what these are. We also store carbohydrates in the muscle cell. We store carbohydrates in the liver, and we have carbohydrate in the blood in the form of blood glucose. We'll talk a lot about the interplay in carbohydrates between these three things, or these three areas. And we really need to understand chemical energy in terms of fuel intake before, during, and after an event. Now, what does our body do? Well, we take that chemical energy, the capacity to do work, and we transform that chemical energy to mechanical energy. Mechanical energy, think of that as just movement. Once we have movement, we have some mechanical energy, and we convert that chemical energy, we transform that chemical energy to mechanical energy. That's what our body does. And we do that aerobically and anaerobically with the use of oxygen and without the use of oxygen. Now, this conversion from chemical energy, this transformation of chemical energy to mechanical energy is not 100% efficient. We lose some of that energy. We don't, if we have 100 units of energy here, we do not get 100 units of mechanical energy over here. In fact, our human body is about 30% efficient. So if we have 100 units of energy here, we'll yield 30% of energy over here. Where does that rest of that energy go? Well, it's thermal regulation, and typically it's transformed over to heat. That's why we sweat. We build up a sweat. Our core temperature can rise, our skin temperature rise, things like that. So that we convert transform chemical energy to mechanical energy. And these are the two major energy pathways to do that. And we'll talk a bit about training principles, frequency, intensity, time, and mode to be able to improve how well and how fast we transform that chemical energy to mechanical energy. We'll talk about monitoring training from heart rate, power devices that we use, maybe rating a perceived exertion in terms of a psychological parameter or lactic acid, blood lactic acid. And we'll really talk quite a bit about thermal regulation in terms of sweat, how much we sweat, why we sweat that much, and most importantly, why and how much hydration or water to take in during exercise. And that even leads us to talking about clothing. So once we're over here in the mechanical energy column, this is where we talk about forces generated, the magnitude, the direction, and the coordination of those forces. We talk about movements, drills that we may do in different sports, technique, and then we talk about resistance forces. If you took 456, Biomechanics of Endurance Performance, we spent more time over here. All right, or if you're going to take that class, we will spend time over here. This class, we're going to spend more time in the red area and a bit of time in this middle area here, talking about how to improve our energy systems to be able to transform chemical to mechanical energy. Now, if we do too much of this too fast or too soon, we can get injured. And so we do need to pay attention down here at the bottom of injury. And we want to do things in a way to minimize the risk of injury. And if we are injured, understand how to rehabilitate injury. And we may talk a little bit about that during this semester. Okay, who are we trying to help? Well, the elite athletes, they certainly are interested in this information. and they really rely on it to improve their performance. However, most of us will never work with high-end athletes. What I'm interested in is working with the mere mortal, working with older individuals who are still competing for events, maybe working with people in their 30s or even their 20s who are training hard, and maybe they want to get faster, or maybe they just want to complete an event. They just want to finish it, or maybe just go have some fun and do a Santa run or dress up as Elvis. Or if you got kids, this class, the content that we're going to be talking about is really designed to help the mere mortal, those of us who are competing at a high level, but and those of us who are just trying to complete an event. Expectations that I have of you as a student: learn the terminology and concepts. Some of these you have already been exposed to in a class like KIN 391, exercise physiology, maybe even 245, anatomical kinesiology. But be an independent learner. Strike that. Class doesn't meet only once a week. This is remote, and we are going to be posting videos throughout the semester to stay on top. But you need to watch those videos, and you need to do the assignments, and be immersed in the class. Read, read, read. Journals, books, websites, magazines, those are good, but really I'm going to push you towards reading journals and books, information that will help sort of talk about the science, and then we will talk about applying that science to understand human performance. Be involved, research as a subject. Ultimately, you can actually conduct research as well, volunteer at events, follow people on Instagram or Twitter, endurance athletes, check in on Facebook with Las Vegas Triathlon Club. Be involved and understand the sport, and then you'll enjoy trying to apply the physiology parameters and concepts to endurance performance. And we'll get through the semester. Many of you, this may be your last class, and that you may be reaching the finish line of your undergraduate degree, which is fantastic. And at the end of the semester, I hope that you can have a big smile on your face, that you feel like you have accomplished a lot in this class. Okay, thank you. That's my introduction for physiology of endurance performance.